Well, welcome everyone. My name is Tom, and I'm your host for this session. A very special welcome to the panelists today, a panel that has multiple decades of combined email experience. The session exists of 60 minutes of Q&A, and we've gathered a lot of questions beforehand and divided them into 4 categories. That is, what is BIMI, implementing BIMI, expectations around BIMI, and the future of BIMI. Social media with our special hashtag, this hashtag expert on BIMI. You're in for the one and only You Shall Not Pass coffee mug, sponsored by the lovely 𝗂𝗓𝗏. 𝗂𝗓𝗏, to begin, can you explain what the idea is behind the You Shall Not Pass related to BIMI?
Okay, so other than we always need more email swag, the reason I decided to go with Gandalf, and obviously the quote that everybody knows, was because most of the customers I deal with have many problems, and the one that pops up the most is always authentication, right? People are having issues with their email, they're having issues monitoring what's happening. So for me, it was very important to let everybody know that authentication was one of the most important and the first steps to take when starting anything that has to do with email. Authentication is one of the ways that you can protect your subscribers, keep it safe for everyone, for yourself and for your subscribers, obviously, improve your email deliverability, and you can start or maintain an online reputation that way. The 3 most common authentications, and what we talk about the most, obviously, other than BIMI, is DKIM, SPF, and DMARC. So DKIM is a technical standard that's going to help protect email senders and recipients from spam or phishing. It's a form of email authentication that proves that you're the one that sent the email. So you can claim responsibility for any actions taken when sending an email. So if it's spammy, or if you're ensuring that the content is really yours. And SPF, on the other hand, is a form of email authentication that's going to validate that the email message has been sent from an authorized email server to detect forgery or prevent spam. So this means that when you're connecting or authenticating with any tool you're using, may it be MailChimp or CakeMail, you're giving permission for that tool to be able to send emails on your behalf. And the third one, which is the most interesting one, is DMARC. So DMARC stands, it's very long, for domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance. It's an authentication and a policy, a form of authentication and a policy. And the most importantly, it's a reporting protocol. So there's 3 versions here. So you can set the DMARC to none. That means that any unauthenticated email will land wherever the inbox provider decides it will, based on your reputation and hundreds of other points. If not, you have the DMARC that can be put to reject or quarantine. So reject would mean that if an unauthenticated email lands in the inbox, you want it to go to spam or junk. And if it's quarantine, you don't want the subscriber or the end user to receive it at all. So this allows you to control what happens to emails that are unauthenticated, meaning they might be yours, obviously. So there's some, checkups you need to do to ensure that you're not blocking your own emails from landing in the inbox. But if not, it is perfect, because when somebody is pretending to be you on the internet, you get a nice report and you can take care of it and shut that down.
All right, sounds good. So in addition to DMARC, we now have BIMI. Matt, can you tell us what BIMI is, actually?
Yeah, so what BIMI allows is for a brand to take ownership beyond authentication of the message that's being sent on their behalf or by their domain. It basically then allows them to, when the right condition is met, so they have the right reputation, they have the right quantity of mail, they have the right certificate if need be, the mailbox provider that is receiving the mail has the opportunity to then display a logo controlled by the brand. So as you can see in the example here, the image on the left would be a message sent without BIMI enabled for a brand, and the image on the right would be a representation of what BIMI would look like in the mailbox client for the Flowmailer domain. So as you can see, there is a logo displayed on the one side, but not on the other, giving people an additional view and recognition capability of a brand. Most people recognize logos and brands and pictures significantly better from a recall point of view. So that's what we're trying to do here with BIMI.
All right, but 𝗬𝗚𝗃, can you then tell us why BIMI was created? What was the idea being to, well, show a logo in someone's inbox? What is the thought behind that, taking DMARC in consideration?
Thanks for the question, Tom. So to keep it pretty simple, make the internet safer. And then if you take it a step further into messaging, which includes the umbrella of email, in-app stuff, and so on and so forth. So when I use the example of protecting the internet, it's kind of how the email industry works together from an anti-abuse perspective. One, for the senders, or in this case, brand marketers, be it small, medium, large, that have reasonably good deliverability reputation tied to a domain name, to add an additional level of trust. And that's where the email authentication pieces come in. On the receiver or inbox provider side, or sorry, mailbox provider side, when they do some checks, DNS-based checks on one of the, at least those authentication protocols, and it passes with a logo tied to that reputation that is good on a domain name, then, you know, that's where this brand recognition comes in. So.
All right. So, well, we've talked about brand recognition, and there's, well, that's both for the mailbox provider, right? So the party receiving the email, as well as for the people reading the email. Andrew Bonnard, can you tell us or explain to us what advantages BIMI brings to the table, considering email deliverability?
I don't think, okay, thanks first of all for inviting me on, and thanks for the question. In and of itself, I don't think BIMI brings anything to the table with deliverability. However, getting to the point where you've, you're able to have BIMI will certainly have a lot to do with deliverability. So, that badge of honor at the end, if you like, will have mean that you've done an awful lot in terms of the technical setup and configuration of your mail flow to ensure that you are following not just best practices, but absolute minimum standards as well in respect to many parts, and that will do a lot to improve your delivery of your mail. Deliverability, is a combination of good delivery of mail and good reputation, and that deliverability comes, that reputation comes, as a consequence of how people interact and engage with the mail stream that you're sending. I think a lot of people, some may disagree, but I think most agree that, the sender from really is the ace in the pack when it comes to, what your open rates are like. So, people will open based on brand or person, or, to take it to the very nth degree. I always used to say, if you want a perfect deliverability, send one message and send it to your mum. That's, still true when you open your inbox. If you see a message from your mum, then you're most likely to be opening that one first. Now, when you've got brands that you recognize, you open those over and above others, and brands that you have an affinity to. And BIMI logo being next to the sender from is only drawing even more attention to that particular brand and that particular sender. So if everything pans out the way we understand it's supposed to pan out in terms of BIMI, you get yourself set up technically correct, you make sure you're not generating complaints, and you're sending enough mail to merit the certification and everything else, and then you meet the required standards for BIMI compliance, then all of those steps will certainly have led to better deliverability and delivery. And I am of the opinion and it's just one person's opinion, that having your logo next to your brand is likely to drive your open rates, therefore your engagement, therefore your reputation up. That is on the premise that people like your brand. If people aren't opening your emails because of your brand name, then having your logo next to it isn't going to necessarily help. So the tax office may well result in more trust for those emails that are being sent. But I'm not suggesting anyone's going to be rushing to open the mail from the taxman first. But certainly, that will also, speaking to what 𝗬𝗲𝗧𝗏 said, it's going to enable people to trust email far more. And with everything else that's going on, that's a critically important thing. Less rubbish in the mailbox also helps your chances of having your mail opened and interacted with. So in reality, not much in the short term. However, I think it's all around the engagement. And if I'm correct, and my assumption is correct, that draws more opens to your email, then that would result in better reputation. But it's a lot of assumptions on my side.
All right, thank you very much. Talking about engagement and open rates, that leads to email marketing directly. Andrew, what do you think are the major advantages of BIMI for email marketers? And
I think Andrew, the other Andrew B, said a lot. When it comes to the intent behind doing or implementing BIMI, is that marketers are really after an increase. They're after its brand that's really going to drive the bulk of your opens. So as a brand reinforcement tool, if we can put it that way, having your logo next to your name is really going to drive that recognition, and that, let's hope, if you've got a good brand, the desire to open. We often, when I'm talking to clients, they're just looking for new ways of getting people to open their emails. They've got pretty regular flat open rates that they go up and down a little bit based on subject line, maybe. And if they're not that great, some spammy subject lines go urgent or other things. But really, look, this is adding a potential additional signal in the inbox to say, recognize and open first. I think for a lot of people, when they hear about it at first, they're really just more drawn to the, can I put my logo? Can I make it bigger? Rather than any authentication or, these really important pieces about making sure that the internet is better looked after and better served. That's really a secondary piece. But I'm talking to marketers a lot of the time primarily. And as I'm kind of a marketer myself, there's a lot of surface level in that world. So, what Matthew and 𝗬𝗲𝗧𝗏 say is right, and 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, those are really important things. But I think a lot of people are just after that gloss. How can I just differentiate myself in the inbox?
Yeah, and BIMI is a perfect opportunity to do just that. But in order to get started with it, and BIMI is in an early phase, honestly. What's in it for mailbox providers? Because they need to support it. Matt, can you tell us about what's in it for mailbox providers and what mailbox providers currently support BIMI?
Sure. So I think there's a few things. So currently, for general availability, the Verizon Media platforms for email are enabling BIMI for people that qualify. If you have questions on their qualifications, their Postmaster website has details on sort of some of the requirements to meet. So you have to have a BIMI record. You have to be publishing at enforcement, meaning either a quarantine record or a reject record. So just meeting those two requirements, you can have a self-certified logo. And where Yahoo deems your messages to meet their requirements, they will show your logo. Currently, Gmail is also in pilot, which is an invite-only pilot. They have additional requirements as part of that pilot in order to participate, meaning you need a verified mark certificate, or VMC, if you've heard the term. Those, again, are only limited right now to the pilot participants. I can't really share anything else beyond that for the pilot. As well as there are other, one other mailbox provider is starting their pilot, which is Fastmail. So if you are using Fastmail, they have started their pilot for BIMI, and not ready for prime time, but it's there in their piloting phase. And as well as there are other mailbox providers interested in piloting in the future. So there are certainly a number of mailbox providers looking at BIMI. But what's in it for them? Beyond getting the logos right within a brand, because we have seen issues in the past where a human maybe makes the wrong decision on which logo to display for a brand. You get the right logo, but you also get the added benefits of senders going through the process of getting compliant with DMARC. So they've taken the time to properly validate their SPF records are correct. They've taken the time to properly validate their DKIM records are correct. And they've moved actually into enforcement. So there is an additional layer of verification that the sending messages are actually approved to be sent by the domain. So that's really, I think, where the benefit is. And then from the BIMI point of view, once you've accomplished all that, you get the gold star that says, now I'm going to display my logo when you meet those requirements. So I know there was a comment in the chat earlier about, is this a security feature? It's not a security feature, right? BIMI does not mean anything for security. It does not mean anything for proving that it's not spam. It's not an anti-spam solution. It's none of those things. It is literally a logo that says, I did the work to get DMARC set up, and this message, based on all of my authentication, was sent by me and is approved to be sent by me, the domain owner. So that's where we're looking at these things. A lot of people have said these are trust marks. A lot of people have said these are validation marks. These are none of the above. These are basically saying, I did the work to authenticate my domains and do it well and do it with the right steps to take as much as I can to protect the end users, at which point the mailbox providers can then say, I trust you enough to display your logo. So that's really where we are with this.
All right. Thanks. Well, when we are going to implement BIMI, we need to start with DMARC. We've talked about SPF, DKIM, DMARC, and especially for DMARC, what does it take for one to implement DMARC? Shmuel, can you talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. So DMARC is basically a record that you're going to have to upload to your DNS. If your site uses GoDaddy or whatever site you're using to host your website and your domain. You get a domain name for it. Obviously, if you're using a subdomain to send your emails, you want to put it on the subdomain. You have a DNS record location. And then you also get that DMARC record, which Matt spoke about, how it has 3 different levels with reject, quarantine, and none. When you're first starting out, before you even get BIMI done, you might want to just leave it at none until you're ready to actually move over into the reject and the quarantine. So that is going to be a prerequisite for getting BIMI done. And then once you get that uploaded, you can move over to the BIMI stage, which has to deal more with the brand logo. So that is going to be, you're going to have to upload more information into your DNS server to point it so that the BIMI records can see it, which also includes a SVG file, which I think we'll talk about that a little bit more just in terms of when we talk about the pitfalls of actually setting it up. But those are kind of like the heads and tails of the same coin. The DMARC record on the one side and the BIMI record on the other side.
Yeah, but how do you guarantee that a logo is valid? Andrew Bonner, can you explain to us how can one guarantee that a BIMI logo is actually the one?
Okay, I can only talk to what I've seen so far, and it's in a pilot project, so it's only little bits of information that's been publicly shared. We've got what Matthew describes as the self-certified BIMI, thanks to Matt, because that the SVG was a real hassle. And we've spoken to somebody that said they may be able to get us an invitation onto the next stage after the pilot's completed, maybe. But one of the definite prerequisites at this moment in time is a trademark registration. I believe that has to be in North America. I believe that has to be with the USPTO. That's the most that I can tell you. But as I understand it, they are looking for something, at least initially, that would set a very high bar for associating the sender with the logo that they're using, and that logo would have to be with the USPTO. They can change that. It's a pilot program. I'm not part of that. I'm not any part of BIMI, so I don't know what their plans are. When I talk about my hopes being my hopes for BIMI being more accessible, and for private conversations, I understand maybe they'll go in that direction. There might be the opportunity for international senders to at some point in time be looking at local trademark registrations or something. So that's where I say I'd like to see it more accessible to more marketers. As I understand it, that is really important to them. There is a real tie between that, but quite likely or quite possibly a better question for Matthew, but maybe he's more restricted because he's closer to it, maybe more restricted from answering as freely as I can. What you have to do is, what I'm saying is conjecture. So what I've been told by company reps that are able to, or state they're able to sell you VMCs or get you VMCs and things. And from what I understand, it's affordable even for an SME, but there is that requirement to have yourself a trademark logo, a registered trademark logo.
All right, thanks. Talking about the VMCs, I see a lot of questions about it, and Matthew was commenting on the YouTube page as well about VMCs. But Matt, can you tell us a bit more about what VMC is, or is that something that you cannot talk about yet?
Yeah, no, I can definitely talk about it. So the purpose of a VMC is to tie a domain to the logo. So it is a third-party validated, and as Andrew mentioned, right, requiring currently proof of ownership or proof of trademark. So there are certain requirements that need to be met in order to be part of the VMC program, that the working group alongside the certificate partners at this point are still defining, which is partly why they're also not publicly available at this point. We hope, our intention is to have this finished and available before or, near the announcement of when the Google pilot will end. But at this point, this is why they are restricted just to the participants. There are a number of technical things and legal things and other things being worked out in order to say, where is the comfort level? Because I think, the challenge of displaying the wrong logo with a brand or displaying the long logo with some type of fraudulent message is obviously a concern for everyone involved. And that's why these types of pilots and these types of testing things take a while. I did notice someone in the comments said, this should have been ready in 2020. We never, as part of the group, put a deadline on when that would be available. But just know that we are working towards a launch date, a go live date that is coming and will be announced relatively soon, I suppose, is the answer. Relatively meaning it could be any time in 2021. So hold tight. We're working on it. If you have questions, do monitor the BIMI group website. All of the latest information will be there, as well as our social profiles on what these are and how more people can get involved. So definitely do stay there. So basically, to go back to your question, apologies for the long-winded answer there. VMCs basically prove ownership and domain of a logo, tie them together so that the recipient side can then say, I'm confident that this logo is owned by this domain and they have the right to display it. That's the short answer. So.
All right. Thanks. Łukasz is here today. Łukasz, can you talk a bit about the role of LinkedIn in the group, or is that something?
We're a member of the group, so we're just support. We're one of, similar to the others, we're supporting the pilot program, and yeah.
Right. Well, we'll leave it with that. There was a question about the requirements. Will they state what the requirements will be once things get out of pilot? I guess the answer is yes. Matt, this is for you, I think. Neil said, I have heard that only marketing emails will be affected, and the domain/email has to have a good reputation per inbox provider. Is that right or wrong?
So again, this will vary based on each mailbox provider, how they choose to implement, how they choose to, whether they want to look and say VMCs are required or not. So on the current iteration, if you will, for the Verizon Media. So if you read their Postmaster site, they do have requirements around reputation, send volume, types of mail being sent. Within the Google pilot, Google is going to rely on VMCs and choose when and where to display logos. Assume everything will be dependent on reputation, right? This is why we have taken the steps to layer this on top of things like DMARC. Those are strong indicators that help build good directional data on reputation of a domain, of a company, of an organization. So assume that all of those things will be impacted, and all of those things will be required at some point in the effort that if you are sending unsolicited messages, you're probably going to land in the spam folder, and in the spam folder, you may not have your logo shown. If you land in the inbox and you do the right thing and you have good reputation and you meet the requirements set forward by those mailbox providers, whether they disclose them or not. As I mentioned, Verizon does disclose it on their Postmaster page. And currently, to my knowledge, there's nothing disclosed by Google on how they plan to implement this.
The next topic we wanted to discuss and talk about the effects and expectations of BIMI. And the first question I'd like to ask is, well, why should every marketer start using BIMI? Jan, can you excite us about why we should use BIMI?
It's a simple reason. It just forces people to do the right thing, and anybody in deliverability can, I promise you, repeats the same things over and over again. 90% of the time, it's always the same problem: either authentication, either list cleaning, either buying lists, which you definitely shouldn't be doing, sending content that people don't care, forgetting about segmentation. So getting all the way to BIMI forces you to look at all those best practices and have to actually implement them. So when you have a little bit of pushback from upper management telling you, no, don't clean the list, that one person we removed from the list might buy all of our products this year, it's not worth it, because at the end of the day, I know most companies might not have the budget or might not have the skills to be able to monitor what is happening with their domains, what is happening with their reputation, our emails, landing in the inbox. People assume that when you send an email, it's just magically going to land where it's supposed to be if the email is correct. And unfortunately, businesses can find out that's not actually the case. You know, people complain that email doesn't work for them, and because people didn't receive the email on the other end. So if you want that, you know, shiny little sticker, like everyone's saying, that prize at the end, you have to be a good sender. You have to do things correctly. And I always say you just do it the humane way. If you go to a store and they ask you for your email address and you feel that negative feeling of, oh, great, if I give them my email, I'm going to get 50,000 emails. Why do you expect that your business is so much more interesting that you can do that to your subscribers? So BIMI is there. Everybody wants a little like verified tick on Twitter or on Instagram. So this is the email version of that. And it's going to be very interesting to see people not only go through all these rules like the certifications and the SVG files. For me, that's the simplest thing. Once we know what we have to do, we'll have a checklist, do the logo, do this, do that, we're good to go. The hard part is not putting BIMI into place and copy pasting some DNS entries, right? The real problem, or it's not really a problem, it's more the effort's going to have to be put into changing practices. And we've seen it in the last year with COVID. We had to think a little bit more. We had to be a little bit more holistic in the way we were sending emails. And we saw a lot of businesses thought that actually sending to less people made them more money. So hopefully BIMI is going to be the little prize at the end that's going to make them do all those thousands of things that all deliverability people say over and over and over again. And that's my take on it. It's my favorite part. People, best practices. How amazing is that? No choice now.
Yeah, well, talking about best practices, we want every marketer to follow best practices, but Andrew Beeson, can every marketer start using BIMI, you think?
Well, you can always put those DNS records up. That's always possible. Whether or not, you know, as Matt was saying, and we've talked about, it's not available in terms of every mailbox provider. And you've got to have the right reputation and sending volumes. So in that sense, no. One thing that just struck me was, as we're talking, is that it's, you know, marketers I deal with a lot are all about that kind of surface level, as I said before, but it's going to force people to have to go down the path of doing things well and to think about doing things well and have to put in that effort to get there. I mean, you can go ahead and do it now, right? You could go in and update your DNS pretty quickly, and it takes no time at all to do. You know, and on the BIMI group website, you can validate that you've done it properly and check that everything is in order. So in that sense, yeah, you can set it up ready to go, but will it display? Not necessarily. You know, here in Australia, a lot of people don't use AOL or Verizon, let's say, mailbox providers. And so it's going to be, you know, the thinnest of slices of people who would even see it if they were in that inbox. Maybe if they were part of the Gmail pilot, there would be a much bigger bulk of people who would see it. And so technically, yes, you can set it up, but is it going to be useful for some people? It depends on where you're located as well. And of course, the VMC certificates, you know, you're going to have to go through hoops if you're an Australian brand and you want to get that done. For at least for my context, maybe not in the US, and you probably already have it. So I would say no, but it is at least well worth going down the route of investigating, finding out what you need to do, and start on that process, because I think it will become something that people are interested in doing way more.
All right, thanks. Well, talking about investigating, we have our own BIMI detective here. Shmuel, you're coming up next. Can you tell us a bit more about the pitfalls you encountered during the BIMI implementation you went through?
Yeah, for sure. So, like Andrew said, it's a lot of it is, you know, updating DNS records and stuff. But I think beyond that, when it comes to, let's say, for example, DKIM or SPF, even DMARC for that matter, it is just literally uploading those DNS records in the right places and submitting them, waiting, you know, for the records to propagate, and then you're certified with those records. When it comes to BIMI, though, there's the SVG file that you need to make sure that that's compliant, and that's a little bit trickier. I'm not a designer, so if you do know designers and people that are experts with creating and manipulating SVG files, you should definitely become better friends with them and get their help on that, because that's one of the places where I had a lot of pitfalls. Getting that scalable vector graphic on to BIMI where it was permitted and it was accepted. A lot of that had to do with the tinyps format, some of the data attributes within that file. I was able to work it out. You do have to go through, it's a lot of trial and error, opening up the SVG file in an editor and looking at the code and just going through. BIMIgroup.org has an excellent guide to this. So you just go through their steps in terms of like what you need to do, and then just literally going through them one by one, uploading it again, seeing if it's valid, seeing if it's not valid, and just you get to the end of the process finally, where I remember when I got there at the end of the end of last year, I was kind of like amazed and wowed by it, and then of course you have to upload it. And then another pitfall is also that there was human contact. So like lots of times we think about setting up domains and setting up DMARC and SPF, and there is no human interaction. It's just uploading the DNS records, and computers talk to each other and they verify the records appropriately. When it came to BIMI, though, there was back and forth. In my case, it was with Verizon support agents, because that's I'm not in the Gmail pilot, and pretty much Yahoo Mail from Verizon is the other provider that has this open. So there was a lot of I did have to do some explaining, because it's not a major brand that I set it up for. It was actually a celebrity type of a brand. So the logo is actually the personality's face. It's not a traditional logo. So there was some explaining to do there. There was explaining, in terms of what volume I'm sending. So that's kind of the pitfall that you have to be aware of, that there is going to be a lot of trial and error, and also just a lot of time just getting it rolling and getting it validated. But if you have time and patience, it can be done.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, you just got to put in a little love and care, and it's rewarding.
After you do it once or twice, or a couple dozen times, it gets a lot easier. I helped Andrew Bonner yesterday with his logo. Having done this for several other brands, it was 10 minutes of work to get the logo.
Yeah. No, I agree.
The first time's a bit of a challenge. So absolutely getting it set up. I did know, the comment around
it took me 2.5 hours before I gave up and gave it to Matt Schmoll. So I'm with you. It's really, really difficult. But yeah, carry on, Matt. It's super easy. 5 minutes left.
Just do it 1,000 times and you'll be good.
Yeah. Practice makes perfect. But the guide, so there are definitely guides available on the BIMI Group BIMI Group website, where we try to walk you through it step by step. There are several tools that we've developed as well that are there's an extension for helping export the right file format, or as close to the right file formats as possible from Adobe. There is a desktop tool that helps format some of the rest of the message to make sure it's properly configured. So, and we will continue to build new FAQs and new training documentation and new help guides based on the repeat questions we get. So I would also say, please do read what we've already produced, because we may already answer your question.
And if I might as well, if you're in a if we're at an enterprise level, you may have loads of hoops to jump through just internally prior to getting to the point of implementing. And so a lot of that, it will need to be done doing reading prior to actually implementing and lining up the right people. You'll have designers, IT, mailbox people, whoever, and all of those approvals. So that can be, it could be super easy if you're on Cloudflare. You go in and it's done in 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
But that's as simple as a single person operation. But
Yeah.
Enterprise level, definitely you need to work on that plan.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Andrew. I mean, Jan Attari said at the top of the hour how when you do implement BIMI and you do implement DMARC, you want to make sure that you know everywhere and everyone that's sending emails from your company, because you don't want to shut anyone out. So when you're dealing with a large corporation enterprise level, you're going to have a lot of homework to do.
One final question, and let's see this for the slide. The future of BIMI. Udeme, can you explain to us, or at least tell us your vision on when, or at what moment in time, every business in the world is going to use BIMI?
That's a big question. So,
that's a big question, yeah.
Yeah.
Save the best for last.
I'll toss in one thing before I answer the question, not that I'm avoiding it. So I think everybody on the panel has mentioned a lot of great resources. A couple of companies have, worded it their way to support their customers. But also it's probably good to point out politely that just setting up a DMARC policy, a DMARC record won't help BIMI. You have to properly set up a DMARC record, and it needs to be either at a quarantine policy or reject. So if it's at, P equals none, no, it has to be the other. It has to be the other two. That's one key thing to find out. And then all the other pieces, the logo, authentication records, and yeah. So now back to your question. So I didn't run away. Most of it is probably around how each company or each marketer internally manages stuff like this. So to Andrew Beeston's point, if it's a pretty large company, for example, LinkedIn is pretty huge. So I have to, if it's something related to a logo, that's not my responsibility. So I probably have to talk to the folks that are under the brand umbrella, pick the specific logo, because we have a bunch of different logos for different purposes. So the one that probably I want something that people recognize the most, because if I'm attaching that to BIMI, I want recipients to recognize the logo versus, I don't know, Black History Month logo. No. So little things like that. But then also, I think there's a two-way adoption, one on the sender side and one on the mailbox provider side. Like Andrew Beeston was saying, it's a great idea. It's kind of like dangling a carrot in front of marketers to say, hey, implement DMARC and add some lipstick on it with all these policies in place. So it's going to be different for every person. Some people may take a day. Some people may take 3 months. I've gone through setting this up for, I think it took me almost 4 or 5 months. The part that made it easy was the company I worked at then already had our domain at P equals reject. So that was a huge hurdle, because if you're starting from the scratch with that DMARC, you have to turn it on, have a mailbox, or be able to see the data, forensics, and all that. So that's my perception, but it's not a wake up and flip the switch and rush and do it. Take your time, go through the steps, reach out for help, talk to people, and you'll get through it. So. Yeah,
I would add to that just one more sort of thought-provoking idea. The idea of BIMI can actually extend as well beyond email. We're just starting with BIMI and email. Using the use case of LinkedIn, because Udeme is here, as a company, you could validate your domain with LinkedIn as an example, and they could pull your BIMI record into their UI for your company page. So if you make changes in the future to your image, they could then update that automatically. Search engines could use this in regards to displaying logos next to search results. Other social platforms could use this as a way to display that logo in real time against the business profile. So the current use case that we are all looking at is BIMI for email. But BIMI in itself could be utilized in any other place where you want to display a logo that is the correct logo, validated, verified for a brand, tied to any additional service in reality. So we spend a lot of time talking about BIMI for email because it's the first use case we're using it for. But that doesn't mean that BIMI for anything else in the future isn't also going to be possible. So if you're out there and you're developing things, I encourage you to think about using BIMI on top of your application as well as a potential solution for logo management.
Yeah, so like I said, I think most of the questions that I read in the comments are answered. If you still have questions, make sure to either go to bimigroup.org or email us, or I believe the LinkedIn and Twitter is below in the description on YouTube, so you can follow us and ask us questions. And that was it for today. Thank you all for attending. Special thanks to all the experts here on the panel. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time and effort you put in. Yeah, I can't say how grateful I am. And yeah, that's it for today. Thank you all.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Flowmailer.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.